Welcome back to Remnants of the Veil, Episode 6, The Choice. Prologue. The reinforcements came in pieces. The Drakkar arrived first, because the Drakkar always arrived first when violence was a possibility. The second strike fleet dropped. Out of the hyperlane in tight formation, 4 Dreadnought-class command ships, 14 Ironside cruisers, and enough Thrak boarding pods to breach a space station. And at the center of the formation, something new. The Hammer of Qhorvaan had no class designation because no ship like it had ever existed. Overlord Qhorvaan had ordered its construction the day Thorok's first report arrived from the gate. Every continent-spanning factory on Vorkath redirected to a single project, working at wartime capacity around the clock for weeks. The result was a flagship that dwarfed the Fist of Vorkath the way the Fist dwarfed a cruiser, over a mile long, hull plating so thick it looked geological rather than engineered. Weapon arrays lined every surface, forward siege batteries, broadside cannons, point defense clusters, more firepower than some fleets carried across their entire roster. The ship was ugly. It was not designed to be beautiful. It was designed to make anything that saw it reconsider its priorities. The hull plating was raw, unpolished, the dark gray of Drakkar industrial metal left in its natural state because aesthetics were a waste of resources that could be spent on armor thickness. It was the largest warship ever built by any species in the galaxy. And it had been built in weeks because an overlord had decided that whatever waited at the Echo Gate was worth the entire industrial output of a fortress world. They took position behind Thorok's original fleet, and the balance of power in the sector shifted so dramatically that every tactical officer on every ship recalculated their assessments simultaneously. The Terran Remnants' reinforcements were less impressive and more complicated. A consolidation task force, 3 cruisers and a diplomatic transport carrying a self-appointed senator named Hargrove, who had declared herself the official voice of human interests at the gate. 2 freeborn. Merchant convoys that had been persuaded, bribed, or threatened into providing support. A research vessel from one of the colony worlds. The Velithari sent nothing visible, but Kalindra returned from the council aboard a courier that carried a sealed resonance crystal. The Velithari equivalent of orders. Sivalith received it. In the resonance chamber, alone, and did not share its contents with anyone. The Qhorvaan had not requested reinforcements. They did not need to. The harmonic connected every monarch in the collective, and through the harmonic, every monarch. Already knew what was happening at the Echo Gate. If more ships were needed, they would come. The collective did not request. The collective responded. For 3 days after the reinforcements arrived, nothing happened. The factions held position. The entity hung in its crescent formation, trailing roots coiled, Aelith light threading. Through its bark, the gate stood silent. The deep current pulsed beneath everything. It was the most heavily armed standoff in galactic history, and everyone was waiting for someone else to move first. The politics were already fracturing. Senator Hargrove had arrived on the diplomatic transport with a mandate from the consolidation faction to establish formal human authority at the gate. Vasquez had informed her politely that authority at the gate was established by whoever had the biggest guns, and at the moment that was the Drakkar. Hargrove had not appreciated this assessment. She had demanded a briefing. Vasquez had given her one. She had not spoken to him since. The freeborn captains wanted to know who was paying for their fuel. The colony research vessel wanted access to the entity for scientific study. On the Drakkar side, Overlord Qhorvaan himself had walked off the Hammer's bridge and transferred to the Fist of Vorkath to stand beside Thorok. He had looked at the entity through the Fist's viewport and said nothing for a very long time. When he finally spoke, it was to Thorok. "You were right to call me here. This is beyond a warlord's authority." His fleet took position behind Thorok's original formation with the precision of a force commanded by the most dangerous Drakkar alive. Among the Velithari, Sivalith's silence about the Council's orders had created tension aboard the Aetherius. Kalindra suspected the orders were to withdraw. Elindra suspected the orders were to deepen communion with the entity at any cost. Neither asked. Neither was sure they wanted to know. The Qhorvaan moved first. Won the Intercept, The moment started small. A single chitin cruiser shifted position within the Qhorvaan defensive sphere. A lateral movement barely perceptible, the kind of adjustment that fleets made 100 times a day. Then a second cruiser moved, then a third, then a fourth, peeling away from the sphere in sequence, each one sliding into escort position behind the one before it, forming a diamond that pointed directly at the entity. It happened in less than 30 seconds. The Qhorvaan did not announce it. The Qhorvaan did not request clearance. 6 chitin cruisers broke formation from the Qhorvaan defensive sphere. They moved in a tight V formation, standard collective escort pattern, heading directly for the entity. Behind them, 2 swarm carriers followed at distance, skitter drone clouds already forming around their hulls. Aboard the Fist of Vorkoth, alarms screamed. Qhorvaan vessels breaking formation, the tactical officer reported. 6 cruisers, 2 carriers, heading, the entity, speed, combat approach. Warlord Thorek was on the bridge in seconds. He had not been sleeping. He had not been sleeping for days. The circles under his eyes, visible even through Drakkar bone plating, told the story of a commander who had been carrying too many unknowns for too long. Combat approach, he repeated, toward the entity. Yes, Warlord. They will enter our perimeter in 12 minutes. And they didn't ask permission. No, Warlord. Thorek looked at the tactical display. 4 cruisers and 2 carriers, enough firepower to threaten a small colony, not enough to challenge his fleet. It was not an invasion force. It was an escort. They were protecting something, or someone. Intercept course, Thorek said. 6 Ironsides. Position them across the Qhorvaan approach vector. Weapons hot, shields raised, and open a channel. The 6 Ironside cruisers swung into formation, a wall of Drakkar metal between the Qhorvaan escort and the entity, weapons systems powered. Up, the void between the 2 formations filled with the electromagnetic signatures of targeting locks. Qhorvaan vessels, this is Warlord Thorek of the Drakkar Dominion. You are approaching a structure within our established perimeter without authorization. Halt your advance and state your intentions, or I will interpret your approach as hostile. No response. The Qhorvaan cruisers maintained course and speed. Qhorvaan vessels, I say again, halt your advance. This is not a request. Nothing. The cruisers kept coming. The swarm carriers behind them began deploying drones in wider patterns, not aggressive formations, but screening patterns. Defensive. They were expecting to be fired upon and were preparing to absorb the first volley. On the Defiance, Vasquez watched the Intercept develop on his tactical display and felt the familiar sensation of a situation moving faster than diplomacy could handle. Helm, bring us between the Drakkar and Qhorvaan formations, now. Captain, that puts us in the crossfire. I know where it puts us, do it. The Defiance swung out of the human formation, a single Ironside-class cruiser, 40 years old, paint-chipped, sensor array still crooked from that repair job 6 months ago. It moved into the gap between 2 fleets that could destroy it, without noticing. 3 freeborn ships followed without being asked, a cargo hauler, a mining barge, and a converted passenger liner with hull plating welded on so badly it looked like a quilt. None of them were warships. All of them put themselves between the guns anyway. On the Fist of Vorkoth, the tactical officer watched 4 unarmed human ships position themselves in a firing lane between 12 Drakkar Ironsides and 6 Qhorvaan chitin cruisers. Warlord, the humans are in our firing solution. I can see that. They are not armed enough to affect the outcome of an engagement, Warlord. They appear to be shielding the Qhorvaan approach. They are not shielding anything. They are making a point. Thorek stared at the Defiance, that battered, undermanned, absurdly outgunned cruiser sitting in the crossfire as though it belonged there. Captain Vasquez is betting that I will not fire through his ships. He is a fool. I would fire through a dozen human ships to reach a target. He paused. But every faction in this sector is watching. If I destroy human vessels to reach the Qhorvaan, the Velithari will use it as justification to turn on us. Vasquez knows this. He is not betting on my mercy. He is betting on my intelligence. That is worse. Warlord Thorek, Vasquez broadcast, on the open channel. Hold your fire. They're not attacking. They're approaching the entity. There's a difference. The difference is irrelevant if they cross my perimeter without... Your perimeter is imaginary, Warlord. You drew a line in empty space and called it territory. The Qhorvaan don't recognize it. Neither does the entity. Nobody does except you. Captain Vasquez, if you do not remove your ship from my firing solution, then shoot through me. Because I'm not moving, and if you fire on an unarmed approach and start a war that none of us can afford, I will make sure every faction in this sector knows that Warlord Thorok fired first. Silence on the channel. Thorok's hand hovered over the weapons console. He could see the defiance on his display. One ship, positioned directly between his Ironsides and the Qhorvaan cruisers. One ship crewed by humans who were either very brave or very stupid. Thorok had learned over the past weeks that with Captain Vasquez, it was usually both. Then the Qhorvaan channel opened. 2. The voice of the collective. What came through the channel first was not a voice. It was a vibration, a subsonic pulse that every being in the sector felt before they heard anything. It passed through hull plating, through bone, through the fluid of inner ears. On the Defiance, Vasquez felt his teeth ache. On the Fist of Vorkoth, every Drakkar on the bridge went still as the frequency resonated through their bone plating. On the Monarch Etherius, the crystal walls hummed. This was how the Qhorvaan communicated, not with words. With resonance, layered impressions of meaning carried through subsonic frequencies that most species could detect but not interpret. For the Qhorvaan, this was language. For everyone else, it was pressure. Then, the pressure resolved into words, translated through the Qhorvaan ship's communication system into audible language, each syllable precise and deliberate, as though the mind behind it was accustomed to thinking in chords and was forcing itself to speak in single notes. This is Monarch Qhorvaan of the Qhorvaan Collective. I am addressing all factions present in Sector Auris 7. On the Fist of Vorkoth, the bridge went silent. On the Defiance, Vasquez leaned forward. On the Luminarch Etherius, Sivillith opened her white eyes. A monarch was speaking, on an open channel, in words. This had never happened in the recorded history of interspecies relations. The collective has monitored events in this sector since our arrival, Qhorvaan continued. We have observed the entity's growth, its communion with the Echo Gate, and its communication with your delegations. We have not participated in these events. This was deliberate. The collective required time to assess. Assessment is complete, she said. We require access to the entity. We require the information your delegations have gathered, and we require a joint session, all factions including the collective, inside the entity's core. Thorok's hand was still near the weapons console. And what does the collective offer in return? Information, Warlord. The collective has been monitoring the deep current since the signal was first detected. We have data that your instruments cannot collect, data gathered through the harmonic, which perceives frequencies your technology cannot reach. The exchange would be mutual. The collective has been sitting in a defensive sphere for weeks, Vasquez said. Silent, no communication, no cooperation. And now you want to join the conversation. What changed? The entity read the gate, Qhorvaan said. What it learned changes everything. We know this because the harmonic felt the reading. The deep current shifted when the entity made contact. Every monarch in the collective perceived it. We do not know what the entity learned, but we know it was significant enough to alter the fundamental energy patterns of this sector. We cannot afford to remain uninformed. You could have asked to join us weeks ago, High Resonant Sivillith said. Her voice came through the Velithari courier relay, thin, strained, the veil burn evident in every syllable. Why now? Because weeks ago the collective believed it could observe from a distance and draw its own conclusions. That assessment has changed. The deep current is not behaving as our models predicted. Something is shifting beneath the harmonic. Something our oldest monarchs have never felt before. We need to understand what the entity knows, and we need to understand it before whatever is shifting completes its movement. Silence on the channel. 3 factions processing the fact that the Qhorvaan, the most powerful and most secretive civilization in the galaxy, had just admitted they were afraid. There is another matter, Qhorvaan said. Her voice shifted, a note of something that, in a monarch, might have been hesitation. The collective will be sending a representative to the entity. This representative is unusual. You will have questions when you see her. I ask that you withhold judgment until the joint session is complete. Define unusual, Thoric said. I cannot define it, Warlord. You will understand when you see her. Vasquez looked at his tactical display. The Qhorvaan cruisers had stopped, advancing, holding position just outside Thoric's perimeter, weapons powered but not targeting. The swarm carriers had recalled their drones. The standoff had shifted from military to diplomatic in the space of a conversation. I'm going to propose something, Vasquez said, and I need everyone to agree before anyone moves. We all go in together, all 4 factions. 1 delegation each. We enter the entity as a group, we share information as a group, and nobody shoots anybody. Can we manage that? The Drakkar agree, Thoric said. The words sounded like they cost him something. The Ascendancy agrees, Sivillith said through her courier. The collective agrees, Qhorvaan said. And the Syndicate will observe from the vault. Yaveth's voice added, uninvited but expected. As always. Fine, Vasquez said. 4 delegations, 1 hour. And Monarch Qhorvaan, whatever your unusual representative is, tell her to leave. Her weapons on the ship. We've already learned that weapons don't work inside the entity. She does not carry weapons, Captain, Qhorvaan said. She is one. The channel closed. In the hour that followed, every faction prepared differently. Thoric ordered his soldiers into what he called diplomatic configuration. Full armor, weapons holstered but accessible, formation loose enough to suggest cooperation and tight, enough to respond to threats. He stood in his quarters for 3 minutes, looking at his warhammer, remembering the roots wrapping around his arm. Then he picked it up and strapped it to his back anyway. Some lessons took more than one teaching. Vasquez briefed Senator Hargrove, who demanded to be included in the delegation. Vasquez denied the request. Hargrove threatened political consequences. Vasquez told her, with the patience of a man who had stared down a Drakkar fleet and a Qhorvaan, Monarch in the same week, that political consequences required surviving the current situation first. You don't have the authority to exclude a sitting senator, Hargrove said. I don't have the authority to do most of what I've been doing, Vasquez replied. And yet here we are. Sivillith prepared in silence. The sealed orders from the council lay in the resonance chamber where she had left them. She had read them once. She would not read them again. What the council wanted and what the situation required had diverged so far that obedience and duty were no longer pointing in the same direction. Elindra checked her instruments a 3rd time. Her hands were shaking again. She had been inside the entity twice, and each time it had changed her understanding of the deep current so fundamentally that her previous research felt like a child's drawings. On the Monarch throne, Qhorvaan briefed Qhtirek. They will fear you, the Monarch said. The Drakkar will see a threat. The Velithari will sense the artifact. The humans will try to understand you, which may be worse than fear. I know what fear looks like, Qhtirek said. The Severed were afraid of me at the end. This is different. These species have never seen anything like you. Their first instinct will be violence or retreat. You must give them a 3rd option, which is stillness. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not move unless necessary. Let them process what they are seeing before you give them anything else to process. You are the most dangerous thing in that chamber. The safest thing you can do is make them forget that. I cannot make anyone forget what I am. No, but you can make them curious instead of afraid. Curiosity keeps minds open. Fear closes them. Qhorvaan looked at the Monarch. 700 years of strategic thinking, distilled into advice about how to enter a room. Curiosity, Qhorvaan repeated. I will try. 3. The reveal. 4 shuttles entered the entity's route corridor in formation. The Drakkar assault shuttle, the Velithari crystal barge, the human transport, and behind them, a Qhorvaan bioshuttle, organic hull pulsing with deep green. Bioluminescence, looking like a living thing inside a living thing. The landing chamber was the same. The bark floor, the sap veins, the amber light, the humid air that smelled of life and something ancient. But the chamber had expanded since the last visit, wider, taller, as though the entity had anticipated a larger gathering and adjusted. The Drakkar disembarked first. Thorek and his soldiers, weapons holstered this time. He had not forgotten the routes. The Velithari followed. Sivalith, Kalindra, Elindra, the guards. The humans came next. Vasquez, his marines, the equipment. Then the Qhorvaan shuttle opened. Qhorvaan emerged first. 18 feet of iridescent green monarch, neural tendrils pulsing with harmonic light, moving with the fluid grace of 700 years. The other factions had never seen a monarch in person. The Drakkar soldiers shifted. The human marines tightened their grips on weapons they had been told to holster. The Velithari guards projected wards that flickered and died in the entity's energy saturation. Behind Qhorvaan, 8 collective soldiers filed out in pairs, deep green chitin, iridescent in the amber light, moving with the perfectly synchronized precision of minds connected to the same network. They carried no visible weapons. They did not need to. Collective soldiers were weapons, mandibles capable of shearing metal, chitin dense enough to deflect energy fire, and the coordination of a billion-mind network directing their every movement. They took position behind Qhorvaan in a formation so perfect it looked choreographed. The Drakkar soldiers watched the collective soldiers. The collective soldiers did not watch back. They did not need to. The harmonic told them everything. Then the second figure emerged. The shuttle's organic hull dilated wider than it had for Qhorvaan, wider than it should have needed to for any monarch. The figure that stepped through the opening had to angle her crown of horns to clear the frame. She emerged into the amber light of the landing chamber, and every living being in the space went still. 19 feet tall. Slightly taller than Qhorvaan, and still growing, obsidian black chitin layered in overlapping plates that caught the amber light and swallowed it. Deep red veins pulsing beneath the surface in rhythms that matched nothing biological. 6 bladed legs, each one leaving thin scores in the bark floor despite what appeared to be deliberate care in how she placed them. Elongated pincers, angular. Protrusions rising from her skull in a crown-like formation. Ridges of bladed chitin tracing her spine. Eyes that glowed muted red. Steady, sourceless. Looking at everything and everyone simultaneously with the calm, comprehensive awareness of a predator that had no natural enemies. And where a monarch's neural tendrils would be, smooth, sealed chitin. No connection to the harmonic, no iridescent green, no light. The landing chamber was silent for 6 seconds. 6 seconds in which no one breathed, no one moved, and every being in the chamber recalculated their understanding of what was possible. Thorek saw a weapon. His hand moved toward his warhammer before his brain caught up with his instincts. He stopped himself, but his soldiers had seen the movement. 12 Drakkar warriors shifted to combat stances, hands on siege rifles, weight forward, the deep muscle readiness of beings bred for violence. Overlord Qhorvaan, standing beside Thorek, did not move. His eyes narrowed. His hand settled on the grip of his longsword with the slow, deliberate certainty of a being who had killed something like this before and was calculating whether he would need to do it again. "Stand down," Thorek said. His voice was steady. His pulse was not. He had fought monarchs. He had seen Qhorvaan kill one with his bare hands. What stood before him now was not a monarch. It was what happened when you took the idea of a monarch and rebuilt it from materials that should not exist. Sivalith felt her through the veil stream. A void. A space where the harmonic should be and wasn't, filled instead with something that burned at frequencies the veil stream could not contain. The Aelith artifact inside the creature blazed like a signal fire in Sivillith's perception. She took a step back. She had never taken a step back from anything in her life. Vasquez looked at his vibration sensors. Every reading was off the charts. He looked up at the creature and said very quietly, "That's what they've been hiding." Elindra dropped her instruments. A human marine took 3 steps backward before catching himself. His sergeant grabbed his arm. "Hold," the sergeant said. "Hold position." The marine held. His eyes did not leave Kutirek. Krenak, somewhere in the Dracor formation, whispered, "What is that?" The collective soldiers behind Qhorvaan had not reacted to Kutirek's emergence. They had seen her before. They had been stationed outside her chamber for weeks. But their synchronized stillness, 8 soldiers perfectly motionless, perfectly calm in the presence of something that had made every other soldier in the chamber reach for a weapon, was its own kind of statement. The collective was not afraid of Kutirek. The collective had made her. That was, in its way, more unsettling than Kutirek herself. Qhorvaan stepped forward. "This is Kutirek," she said. "She is the collective's response to the threat in the deep current. She is here as my witness. She will observe. She will not speak unless spoken to." "She is Qhorvaan," Thoric said. It was not a question, but there was a question buried in it. The question of how something that looked like that could share. A species with the green chitined monarch standing beside it. "She was Qhorvaan," Qhorvaan said. "What she is now does not have a name." Kutirek stood in the landing chamber and said nothing. Her muted red eyes moved across the assembled delegations. Dracor Velithari human, species she had never seen in person. Species that were staring at her with fear and fascination and the particular kind of horror that comes from seeing something that should not exist. She had spent 3 years on Skalveth, alone with her people, invisible to the galaxy. Now, the galaxy was looking at her and she could feel every eye. She could also feel the entity, the structure around them, the bark, the sap, the roots, the continent-sized mind that housed them all, was aware of her in a way it had not been aware of the other delegations. She could feel its attention focused on her like sunlight, through a lens. The artifact in her chest resonated with the deep current energy saturating the entity's body, and the entity responded. The sap veins nearest to Kutirek brightened. Not gradually, visibly in real time, amber light intensifying as she stood there. The bark floor beneath her bladed feet pulsed. The walls of the landing chamber shifted subtly, as though the entity was adjusting itself to accommodate not her size but her energy. The deep current saturation in her immediate vicinity increased until Elindra's instrument stopped reading entirely. "It recognizes her," Elindra whispered. "The entity recognizes the Aelith energy inside her. It is responding to her the way it responds to the gate." Sivillith felt it too. Through the veil stream, the entity's curiosity was palpable, not the cautious attention it had shown the previous delegations, something deeper, almost hungry. The entity had been grown to find answers, and it had just encountered a being carrying Aelith technology in her living body. To the entity, Kutirek was not a visitor. She was a question that walked. Kutirek felt the attention and did not move. "Curiosity," Qhorvaan had said. "Let them be curious." She stood, and she waited, and she let the galaxy look. The silence after Qhorvaan's introduction lasted longer than anyone was comfortable with. Vasquez broke it. Because Vasquez always broke silences, it was, he had decided, his primary function at this point. "Chitarek," he said. He stepped forward, not toward the Monarch, but toward the space between the factions, the neutral ground that he had claimed as his own since the first day at the gate. "You said she was Qhorvaan. Was. What is she now?" "That is what we are. Here to determine," Qhorvaan said. "That is not a sufficient answer for the species standing behind me with guns," Vasquez said. Thoric's voice cut across the chamber. "The Dracor killed a monarch in the Shrieking Nebula. Overlord Qhorvaan brought it down himself. The creature in front of me reads larger on my sensors than that monarch did." He was staring at Qhorvaan with the fixed, calculating gaze of a predator assessing a rival. If I am going to walk deeper into this entity with that at my back, I need to know what it does. She, Qhorvaan corrected. Not it. She. What does she do? Qhorvaan spoke for the first time. Her voice carried harmonics that vibrated through the bark floor and into the bones of every being in the chamber. The Dracor soldiers flinched. The human marines gripped their weapons. The Velithari guard stepped closer to Sivillith. I survive, Qhorvaan said. That is what I do. It is what I have always done. The chamber processed this. Then Sivillith, who had been standing with her eyes closed since the reveal, opened them. The silver veil-burn lines on her skin caught the amber light. She is telling. The truth, Sivillith said. I can feel her through the veil stream. There is no deception. There is no hostility. There is... She paused, searching for words that did not exist. There is grief. Very deep. Very old. And something else. Something the veil stream cannot identify. An energy that does not belong to any frequency I know. The Aelith artifact, Elindra whispered. She is carrying Aelith technology inside her body. Yes, Qhorvaan said, and that is why we are here. Because whatever the entity learned from the gate, the artifact inside Qhorvaan may be the key to understanding it. She is not our weapon, she is our interpreter. Whether that was true or a strategic reframing no one could determine, but it was enough. For now. They walked toward the chamber together. 4 factions. Overlord Qhorvaan had not spoken since Qhorvaan's emergence. He had watched. He had assessed. He walked now at the front of the Dracor formation, 8 and a half feet of scarred chitin, broader than Thorak, older than Thorak, carrying a longsword across his back that was the most beautiful weapon in the sector. The blade was Dracor forged, double-handed, 6 feet of folded metal with an edge that could split starship hull plating. The crossguard was shaped like Dracor tusks. The grip was wrapped in the hide of something that no longer existed. Qhorvaan had carried it for 60 years. He had used it to kill a monarch. He watched Qhorvaan walk ahead of him, her bladed legs scoring the bark floor, her obsidian chitin swallowing the amber light, her crown of horns nearly scraping the ceiling of corridors that had been built for smaller things. He said nothing, but his hand had not left the longsword's grip since the landing chamber. They reached the node. The chamber opened around them. The cathedral space, the tree, the node pulsing with pale gold white and amber light. 4 delegations spread across the chamber floor. Dracor soldiers on one side, Velithari guards on another, human marines in the center, collective soldiers behind their monarchs. Qhorvaan stepped toward the node. The sap veins in the walls brightened at her approach. The bark floor pulsed beneath her feet. The entity's attention focused on her with the intensity it had shown in the landing chamber. Recognition, curiosity, hunger. And Overlord Qhorvaan drew his sword. 6 feet of folded metal clearing a sheath built to hold it. The ring of the A. Blade echoed through the chamber, amplified by the organic walls, carried through the sap veins into the entity's deepest corridors. That thing, Qhorvaan said, is larger than the monarch I killed in the Shrieking Nebula. It is carrying Aelith technology inside its body, and your collective built it and brought it here without telling any of us. He looked at Qhorvaan. Explain why this is not an act of war. Qhorvaan's subsonic impression radiated through the chamber, not fear, not submission, but the measured patience of a monarch addressing something beneath her concern. You killed a monarch, Overlord. A young one, barely 200 years old, confused by an artifact it had consumed, weakened by the bonding process. The collective mourned her. We did not forget. Her tendrils pulsed. But Qhorvaan is not that monarch, and you are not facing a confused, weakened creature. I would advise you to consider the difference carefully before you act. I have considered it, Qhorvaan said, and moved. He was fast, faster than anything 8.5 feet tall should be. 60 years with the long sword had burned the Wai, movements into his body so deeply that thought was unnecessary. He crossed the distance to Qhorvaan in 3 strides, blade raised in a 2-handed grip, aimed at the joint between her thorax and skull, the same killing stroke he had used in the nebula. Kalindra was faster. The Velithari attendant stepped into Qhorvaan's path with a crystal staff in her right hand and a ward already forming on her left. The staff was Velithari forged, 3 feet of crystallized arcana, dense enough to channel energy, light enough to move with precision. She planted it against the flat of Qhorvaan's blade and redirected, not blocking the strike but angling it, using the staff as a fulcrum to guide 6 feet of Drakkar steel past her body by inches. The longsword cut air where her shoulder had been a half-second before. Qhorvaan recovered instantly. He reversed the blade into a backhand cut, low, aimed at her legs. Kalindra planted the staff against the floor and vaulted, the blade passing beneath her as she projected a ward under her feet to push off, changing direction mid-air, landing 3 feet to Qhorvaan's left. She struck. The crystal staff cracked, against the top of Qhorvaan's sword hand, not hard enough to break bone through Drakkar plating, but hard enough to shift the angle of his grip. His next swing went wide by 2 inches. 2 inches was the difference between a killing blow and a miss. Qhorvaan looked at her. His amber eyes held the cold assessment of a predator that had just been surprised by something it had classified as prey. "You are brave," he said, "and small." "And between you and her," Kalindra said. Her golden eyes burned. "Move me." He tried. The Overlord pressed forward with the methodical precision of 60 years of combat. Each strike was a killing stroke. Qhorvaan did not wound, did not faint, did not test. Every swing of the longsword was designed to end the fight. He cut high. Kalindra redirected with the staff, guiding the blade past her face, feeling the displaced air against her skin. He cut low. She projected a ward beneath the blade, a horizontal plane that deflected the edge upward, turning a leg strike into an overhead that she sidestepped. He thrust. She shaped a ward into a curved surface that caught the point and slid it past her ribs, the blade's edge close enough to slice the fabric of her robes. Each exchange cost her. The entity's deep current saturation made every ward harder. To project, every channeling more expensive. Her crystal staff rang with each contact. Drakkar steel against Velithari crystal, force against precision, a contest the crystal could not win indefinitely. Fine cracks were forming along the staff's surface. Her golden eyes dimmed with each projection, the light in them flickering as her reserves burned down. But she was not just defending. Between Qhorvaan's strikes, in the half-seconds where his blade was committed to a trajectory and his body was following the momentum, she struck back. The staff hit his wrist, not damaging, but redirecting. His elbow, changing the angle of his follow-through. His knee, disrupting his footwork. For a single step, forcing him to plant his foot a fraction of a second late, throwing his next stroke off-center. It was like hitting a stick against a log. Effective, not damaging, but Kalindra was not trying to damage the Overlord. She was trying to keep him off Qhorvaan, and every redirected strike, every shifted angle, every stolen half-second was a victory measured in survival rather than harm. Qhorvaan adjusted. He began reading her patterns, the way she favored her left side for ward projection, the way she pushed off with the staff when retreating, the way her eyes flickered to his. Hands before each strike. 60 years of killing had made him a student of his opponents, and students eventually passed their exams. He feinted high. Kalindra raised a ward. He reversed low, faster than the feint, a true strike aimed at her exposed right side. She projected a ward blade to intercept, a thin edge of crystallized arcana meant to deflect the longsword's flat. The longsword's edge hit the ward blade and shattered it. The steel continued, slowing but not stopping, and caught Kalindra across the forearm. She stumbled. Not far, not fatally. But the cut was real. Violet blood, bright against her silver-blue skin, dripping onto the bark floor. Her crystal staff, cracked from base to tip. One more impact would break it. Qhorvaan raised the longsword for the finishing stroke. Across the chamber, Thorak had engaged Qhorvaan. The warlord had watched Qhorvaan move on the creature and made his own calculation, not strategy, not politics, but the raw arithmetic of a soldier. If that thing is what the Qhorvaan claim, it needs to prove it. If it can't survive a warhammer, it can't survive what's coming. He charged. The warhammer came around in a horizontal arc, the full-body swing of a Drakkar who had spent 30 campaigns solving problems with blunt force. The head of the hammer was compressed warship hull metal, dense enough to crack a bulkhead, moving fast enough to blur. Qhorvaan blocked. 2 of her 6 legs, the forward pair, crossed in front of her thorax, bladed edges angled to intercept. The warhammer's head struck the junction of the 2 blades. The impact rang through the chamber like a bell. Thorax arms shuddered. The hammer stopped. Qhorvaan had not moved. Thorax pulled back and swung again. Overhead this time, bringing the hammer down with the weight of his entire body behind it. Qhorvaan shifted one leg upward, catching the descending head on a single blade, deflecting it sideways. The hammer struck the bark floor and cratered it. Sap erupted from the impact point. She was not fighting him. She was solving him. Each. Attack read and answered with the minimum force necessary, the way a mathematician solves an equation that is complicated but not difficult. The artifact's reflexes moved her body faster than her mind could direct, and the disconnect was visible. Her movements were precise but mechanical, a body built for combat operating on instincts that did not belong to the mind inside it. Thorax swung a third time, diagonal, aiming for the gap between her thorax plates. Qhorvaan blocked with her middle pair of legs and struck with the rear pair. It happened faster than Thorax could react. 2 bladed legs, each one edged like a sword, sweeping forward from behind her body in a scissoring motion that caught Thorax across the chest. The blades cut through his chitin plating, not deeply, not fatally, but with enough force to score 2 parallel gashes from his left shoulder to his right hip. Thorax staggered. He looked down at his chest. 2 lines of dark fluid welled. Through the cracked plating, the first blood anyone had drawn on him in 15 years. He looked up at Qhorvaan. She had not pressed the advantage. She had not followed up. She stood before the node with her 6 legs planted, her muted red eyes watching him. And she waited. "You are fast," Thorax said. His voice was strained. The cuts were not dangerous, but they hurt in a way that went beyond the physical. The hurt of a warrior who had just learned that his strength was insufficient. "I did not choose to be," Qhorvaan said. Thorax raised the warhammer. The cuts. Across his chest leaked fluid down his armor. He was going to charge again because Thorax always charged again because that was who he was, because stopping meant admitting something he was not ready to admit. Across the chamber, Qhorvaan's longsword was descending toward Kalindra. The Velithari was on one knee, her staff was broken, her last ward was forming between her hands, thin, flickering, barely there, not enough, not nearly enough. "Enough!" Vasquez shouted. He was standing between the 2 fights, unarmed, his marines behind him with weapons raised but not firing because no one had given the order and no one knew who to aim at. "We are inside the entity responded. Roots erupted from every surface simultaneously, not from the floor alone, from the walls, from the ceiling, from the tree itself. Hundreds of roots, thick as torsos, moving with speed that made the Drakkar charge look glacial. They wrapped around every being in the chamber. Qhorvaan's longsword was wrenched sideways, pinned against his torso by roots that coiled around both arms. His legs were anchored to the floor. More roots wrapped around his neck, not choking but holding, making the point that choking was a possibility the entity had chosen not to exercise. Thorax was seized mid-stride, warhammer locked. Against his chest, legs immobilized. The roots pressed against the fresh cuts on his chest and he hissed through his teeth. Every Drakkar soldier, every human marine, every collective soldier, every Velithari guard, 40 armed beings from 4 factions pinned simultaneously by a mind the size of a continent that had watched the violence play out and decided it had seen enough. Kalindra was seized mid-kneel, roots coiling around her wounded arm, her legs pressing her broken staff against her chest. Sivalith was pinned standing, her white eyes wide, roots wrapping around her torso with a gentleness that was somehow worse than force. Vasquez was locked in place, arms at his sides, his mouth still open from the shout that had been cut short. Elindra was held against the wall, silver eyes streaming tears she could not wipe. Qhorvaan's neural tendrils were pressed flat against her body by roots that did not care how many billions of minds they were interrupting. Even Qhorvaan, roots coiled around her obsidian chitin, thicker than the ones holding the others, denser, layered, as though the entity understood that holding her required more effort than holding everyone else combined. Her six-bladed legs were pinned, individually, each one locked at a different angle. Her crown of horns was pressed against a root that curved over her head like a cage. Every being, every faction, every soldier, every scholar, every leader, every warrior. The entity held them all simultaneously, with the absolute indifference of something so vast that the distinction between armed and unarmed was irrelevant. Inside its body, everything was subject to its will, everything. The chamber was silent except for the sound of 40 soldiers breathing against the pressure of roots that would not yield. Qhorvaan strained, every muscle engaged, the same strength that had torn a monarch apart in the nebula. The roots did not move. "The tree is making a point," Vasquez said into the silence. "The tree made the point," Qhorvaan said through gritted teeth. "I am listening." The roots held for 30 seconds. 30 seconds in which no one breathed, no one struggled, and every being in the chamber understood, with the visceral certainty of prey in a predator's grip, that they existed. Inside this structure at its discretion, then the roots released. All of them, simultaneously, every being freed at the same instant, the bark sealed, the sap veins resumed their pulse. Qhorvaan sheathed his sword. The motion was slow, deliberate, final. Vasquez rubbed his arms where the roots had held him. The pressure had not been painful, but it had been absolute. The kind of grip that made you understand your skeleton was not as strong as you thought it was. Elindra was sitting on the bark floor, her instruments scattered, her silver eyes unfocused. Qhorvaan's tendrils were pulsing erratically, the harmonic reconnecting after being physically suppressed for 30 seconds. Across the collective, billions of minds had felt the interruption. The monarchs would have questions. Qhorvaan flexed her bladed legs. The roots had held her harder than anyone else, and released her just the same. The entity had made no distinction between the weapon that started the fight and the weapon the collective had built. Inside this body, all of them were equal. All of them were small. Thoric lowered his warhammer. He touched the cuts across his chest, 2 parallel lines that would scar and stay with him for the rest of his life. A mark left by something he could not beat. He had never carried a scar like that before. Kalindra was on both knees, her arcana depleted, her staff broken in 2 pieces on the floor. Sivillith knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You should not have done that," Sivillith whispered. "Someone had to," Kalindra said. Her voice was barely there. "And you are too important to risk." Qhorvaan stood before the node. She had not moved during the root pinning. She looked at Qhorvaan. He looked at her. 2 killers, separated by 12 feet of scored bark floor, measuring each other with the mutual respect of beings who had tested the other's limits and found them real. "You killed a monarch," Qhorvaan said. "Yes," Qhorvaan said. "I am not a monarch." The sentence hung in the chamber. Qhorvaan heard what it meant. "Then what are you?" he asked. "I am still finding out," Qhorvaan said. The node pulsed. The entity had seen what it needed to see. The conversation. The node's light shifted. The pale gold-white threads of Aelith energy woven through the Verdanthi's amber brightened, and the vibrations that had been a constant background presence since the delegations entered intensified into something focused, directed. The entity was no longer waiting. It was speaking. High-resonant Sivillith knelt before the node. Her robes were torn where the roots had held her. The veil burn on her skin pulsed silver. She pressed her hands to the bark floor and opened herself to the communion. What came was not fragments, not impressions, not the fumbling attempts at communication that had characterized the entity's early efforts. What came was clear. The entity shared what it could. Not everything. Sivlith could feel the vast reserves of knowledge the entity was holding back. Layers of memory and meaning too dense or too dangerous to transmit to minds that had not been built to receive them. What it gave them was the surface, the shape of the truth without the depth. "Something is coming," Sivlith translated, her voice thin. The entity does not know what. But the gate was built as a response to it. A test. The species that gather here will be judged, not by their strength, not by their technology, not by their arcana, by their response. "A test," Qhorvaan said. His hand was no longer on his sword. The roots had cured him of that reflex, at least temporarily. Judged by whom? The gate itself, or whatever the gate was built to serve. "What response does it want?" Thorok asked. Blood was still seeping through the cracks in his chest plating. Sivlith was silent for a long moment. The communion deepened. The node pulsed. "The entity does not know," she said finally. The gate gave it the question, not the answer. "We are being tested, and we do not know what the test requires." "That is not a test," Thorok said. "That is a trap. It dragged itself across the galaxy to tell us we are being judged, and it cannot tell us the criteria," Vasquez said. "That is either the most important warning in history or the most useless one. I am not sure which." Chatirek stood at the edge of the communion. She could feel the entity's communication through the artifact, not translated through Sivlith, but received directly, raw, unfiltered. The Aelith technology in her body resonated with the Aelith knowledge the entity had absorbed from the gate, and the resonance carried information that Sivlith's communion could not. She did not share what she received. Not yet. She filed it, in the place where the artifact stored things, the deep, cold space where emotion used to live, and she waited. The communion lasted what felt like an hour. The entity shared what it could. The factions listened. Vasquez recorded. Aelindra wept quietly. Thorok stood with his arms crossed and his chest bleeding and said nothing, because the entity had earned his silence the only way anyone could. When it was done, the node dimmed. The communication was over. The entity had given them everything it had. Everything except the answer. That, it seemed, was their problem. Epilogue. They emerged into the void, and the clocks told them 48 hours had passed. No one argued about it this time. The time distortion was becoming familiar, not understood, not accepted, but familiar. Vasquez looked at his watch, noted the discrepancy, and filed it in the growing category of things he could not explain and had stopped trying to. The entity's crescent hung behind them, darker than before, the Aelith threads brighter, the trailing roots coiled tight. It had given them what the gate had given it. Now it waited, the way the gate waited, the way everything in this sector waited, for the factions to decide. Aboard the Fist, Qhorvaan stood at the viewport and stared at the gate. The long sword hung at his side. The root's grip was still fresh in his memory, the absolute certainty of something that could have killed him and chose not to. He had not experienced that since he was young. "Thorok," he said without turning from the viewport. "Overlord. Get that wound treated, and then assemble my commanders. All of them. We have a decision to make, and I will not make it without counsel." Aboard the Defiance, Vasquez sat in his quarters and stared at a blank screen. Senator Hargrove was requesting, demanding, a full briefing. The colony research vessel wanted the vibration data. 3 freeborn captains were asking if they could leave. He ignored all of it. He was thinking about what the entity had shown them. The Aelith's warning, the test, the choice that was coming. He picked up his coffee. It was cold again. He drank it anyway. On the Monarch Etherius, Sivlith lay on, the floor of the resonance chamber. The veil burn had spread to her hands. Silver lines traced her fingers like cracks in old porcelain. Kalindra sat beside her, her wounded arm bandaged, her broken staff in her lap. "The Council will not like what we have learned," Kalindra said. The Council will not believe what we have learned, Sivalith replied. Not until they feel it themselves, and by then it may be too late. Aboard the Monarch throne, Qhorvaan and Qhorvaan stood together at the membrane window. The entity showed you something it did not show the others, Qhorvaan said. It was not a question. Yes, Qhorvaan said. What did it show you? Qhorvaan was silent for a long time. Through the membrane window, the gate shimmered. The entity's crescent pulsed. And somewhere beneath everything, the deep current stirred. Something old, she said. Something the Qhorvaan have forgotten. Something the artifact remembers. She did not elaborate. Qhorvaan did not press. Outside, the galaxy waited for a choice that no one was ready to make. And in the space between the gate and the entity, between the Aelith's warning and the faction's response, the first seeds of what would come next were already taking root, not in the void, not in the deep current. In the minds of the beings who had been shown the truth and now had to decide what to do with it. End of episode 6, and thank you for watching.